All right, how many of you got a chance to read Ezra chapter 1? Yeah, we got a few things we're going to look at about that and take a look. Here's what I want to share with you tonight before we get started. I want this Bible study to last until approximately like the week before Thanksgiving. My hope is that we'll go until then. Then after Thanksgiving, I want to transition to a somebody's really upset. Transition to an Advent study. Believe it or not, we're almost there. And then after that, the first year, then we'll pick up something else. But one thing I don't want to do is, I don't want to have to like stall for time. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to do Ezra and Nehemiah until Ezra and Nehemiah are finished. And then we'll just start something else. So I don't know when that will be. But if you guys want to have some input on that, I'll be glad to. If there's a book of the Bible you'd like to look at that's not called Revelation, I'll be happy to do that for you. And simply because there's just too much there to kind of squeeze in right at the end. But any of the shorter books of the Bible, so don't say, let's do Psalms, all 150 chapters. Yeah, we're not doing that either. So, but yeah, if there's a particular passage of the Bible or something that you'd like to take a look at, or a story from a specific story, something, I'd be happy to do that. And we're a few weeks away from that. But very good. All right, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at Ezra chapter 1 and chapter 2, and then kind of see where we are. And we may flip over and look at Nehemiah chapter 1, just to kind of to break us in. Any of you who weren't here last week, if you're interested in the timeline that I set out last week, the good Lord willing, that should be on our YouTube channel. You can go back and watch that. But that'll help put into context historically what we're talking about here tonight. Now, one of the things that we did talk about is in the midst of Ezra and in the midst of Nehemiah, two books that kind of go together, is the people were drug off into exile. They were taken into exile by a nation called Babylon. So they were drug off by the Babylonians into a place they didn't want to go. So that happened. Some books of the Bible that were written during the time of being carried away are books like Jeremiah, Lamentations, some parts of Isaiah were in on that too. And so they were a part of what was happening then. So they were in the getting carried away. Books that were written while they were carried away and in the nation of Babylon are books like, Esther, Daniel, some of the minor prophets. A lot of the minor prophets were written during that time. And then toward the end of that time, when they're transitioning back to their homeland, is Ezra and Nehemiah, and then a few other ones we have as well. So the reason I tell you that is because some of the names that Ezra starts dropping here are going to be significant in that process. And we're going to see some names in here that we recognize from some of those stories, and I'll point them out, and you may know some of them as well. All right, I am reading from the New Living Translation, and that's what I read from on Sunday morning as well, just because it's a favorite of mine. If you're interested, all the time I get questions, I want to buy a study Bible. What's the best one to buy? Very easy answer. It's called the Life Application Study Bible. I've had this Bible for 25 years. And this, when a lot of my stuff I do online, Sunday morning I do stuff online. I like this one. You can get it pretty cheap now off eBay. But as far as having good study notes and being very readable and accessible, this is the one you should look for. So if anybody ever says, I don't know what Bible to buy, Life Application is a favorite of mine, has been for years. And I don't get any commission off of that, so I'm not like trying to be the salesman here. Like you're watching the YouTube thing and they break into a commercial. That's not what that was. So, all right, Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled Jeremiah's prophecy by stirring the heart of Cyrus to put this proclamation into writing and to send it throughout his kingdom. All right. So Ezra, or whoever the scribe was who was writing the book of Ezra, drops a lot of names here. He drops King Cyrus of Persia, who we're going to talk about in a second, and he also drops Jeremiah, a prophet that you're probably familiar with. If you ever find yourself being incredibly happy and fulfilled in life, very satisfied with how things are going, and you say, you know what I need? I need a little touch of depression. Go read the book of Jeremiah. Okay? It's a downer of a book if there ever was one. And but a few of Jeremiah's prophecies did talk about restoration, but in a 50-some-odd chapter book, we're talking a handful of verses. Everybody from the book of Jeremiah knows Jeremiah 29:11. Anybody here know that one off the top of your head? I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to tear you down and stuff. That's one verse in a great big book, and it's probably the only happy one in there. But that's what Jeremiah was talking about, is the fact that someday the people will come back, and Ezra is just recognizing, and it finally happened. And it happened because of this guy named King Cyrus. Cyrus was king of the Persians, and what Cyrus realized very, very quickly, now Cyrus was only the king of Persia for about 9 years. He wasn't the king a very long time. But one of the things that Cyrus realized very quickly is when he conquered the Babylonians, he found these people that we would know today as the Jews, they would be the Israelites. He found them and he quickly realized these people only want one thing. All they want is to go back to their land. That's it. If I let them go back to their land, they promise they'll be good. So what he did is he found a person to put in charge named Zerubbabel, which we're going to talk about him in a second. But the reason they chose him is because Zerubbabel could trace his ancestry back to King David. So he was a rightful king under the old tradition. So everybody said, you put him on the throne and we'll do what he says. So Cyrus basically said, put a knife to the guy's throat and said, you will only say what I say and we're all going to be happy. It turns out nobody knew any different and everybody was thrilled. So King Cyrus in the Bible is looked at as A-OK with everybody. The Bible just thinks he is the thing. Because what he allowed the people to do was go home. After about 50 years or so of being in exile, he allowed the southern kingdom of Judah to go home. Remember we talked about last week, the kingdom of Israel was the whole thing. The southern part broke off. The northern part was taken off into exile about the same time as the southern part. 50 years later, the southern part came back, and now who remembers when the northern one came back? 48. Yep, 1948. So just within, almost one lifetime of now. So it took that long for them to come back. So good. So Cyrus says he now has Zerubbabel under his thumb, and since Zerubbabel is a puppet doing whatever Cyrus says, everybody is perfectly happy. So that may have been a little tongue-in-cheek. I'm sure not everybody was happy, but enough people were happy to keep peace, and that's what Cyrus wanted. You got to hand it to Cyrus. He was a bright guy. He knew what he was doing because he was able to set the system up so he didn't have to have his boot on anybody except one guy in order to run the show, and he was perfectly happy with that. So as kings often do, and if you read like Esther and you read Daniel, kings are making proclamations all the time. It's a big thing they wanted to do. Think of a proclamation, honestly, kind of like a social media post. I mean, it's really not much different, with the exception it has the authority of the king. So when the king says, thus saith the king, that's what happened. Because if that's not what happened, somebody was probably going to lose their head. I mean, because kings kings ruled with an iron fist. So he put out this proclamation, and here's what it says. Ezra chapter 1, verse 2. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem in the land of Judah. Let's stop right there. That's a lot of stuff, don't you think? Now, the first thing Cyrus does here, that far be it for me to question the Bible, but I find a little bit suspect, is it makes Cyrus sound like he is praising the God of the Hebrews. I'm going to bet that probably didn't happen because he had his own religion. I actually looked up what it was, and there are so many letters in it, I'm not going to butcher it, but the Persia had it was like Zoroastrianism or something like that. And actually that religion still exists today in very small sects. And I'm sure I said it completely wrong. So when you look it up and it doesn't look like what I said, I'm just using the alternative Tim pronunciation. So, but that's what he was. So he probably wasn't really happy. But since he was doing God's will, I mean, as what the people interpreted as God's will, they said, well, God must have ordained him to do this. So they were interpreting based on his actions who was empowering this. And that's a perfectly legitimate interpretation to see God working through somebody, whether Cyrus realized it or not. And that's what they were saying. The other thing Cyrus claimed is that the good Lord, who has decided to bless him, has given him all the kingdoms of the earth. All of them? Okay, all of them. And then the next thing, and this is the part that gets interesting. So, God of heaven, appreciate that guy. All the kingdoms of the earth are now under my command. Great for that. And so now this God that I'm giving gratitude to has asked me to build his temple. Now that's very interesting. How many of you are familiar with King David? You don't need King David? All right, we're going to get a little interactive because you guys are way too quiet tonight. Tell me something, anything. Tell me something King David did. I don't care what. What did he do? Anything. No, he didn't. He did not build the temple. His son attempted to, yes. Hey, what else did David do? Come on, the stone and the sling. You guys heard the story, the 9-foot-tall guy, David and Goliath. What else?
He was the man
after God's own heart, even though he made a lot of mistakes. Anybody remember anything else David did? A lot of battles. Yes, he was. He was, and for a lot of different sides of every conflict, yes. Let's get one more. One more thing David did. He what? He wrote the book. He wrote a bunch of the Psalms. He sure did. And so he was the ultimate warrior, poet, king. I mean, the guy had it going on. But when it comes to building the temple, at the end of David's life, and that's why I wanted to point this out, David said, wow, I'm living in this incredible palace, which he was, because he was the king of the earth at that point. And but God's, the Ark of the Covenant and God's presence was in a tent. And David said, that don't seem right to me. I'm going to go build a temple. And God said, no, you're not. Your son is going to do that. And Solomon, King Solomon, who was David's son, built the first temple that was destroyed later. So that's what it came from. So now, a new king has been tasked, apparently, with building the temple. And that would be King Cyrus, and he's going to, as we're about to find out, he's going to assign the duty of building the temple to Ezra. So the way this happened was when King Cyrus came to power, he said, well, I got to start sending, if you guys want to go back, and that's the goal here, that's fine, I'm cool with that, we need to start sending people back. So he sent back 3 waves of refugees, basically. The first wave he sent back was led by Zerubbabel, this new king, puppet king. He led the first wave back. And what Zerubbabel went back and did is he established the fact that Jerusalem existed again. So they went back and said, basically, that's what he did. He said, Jerusalem is here. And there it was. So, and they started to do some perfunctory work of sustaining a population and that kind of stuff. A number of years later, King Cyrus commissioned a second group to go back. This group was led by Ezra. We're going to read about them in this book. Ezra was tasked to rebuild the temple. So, and we're going to find out, spoiler alert, that's what he does. So Ezra the priest, he goes back to rebuild the temple. A number of years after that, and we're going to see this when we get to Nehemiah, he sent back another group, this group led by Nehemiah, and Nehemiah went back to build one specific thing. You might know what that was? The wall. He wanted to put the wall around Jerusalem. And the reason he wanted to do that was because any city worth its salt had a wall around it. That's what it meant to be a city. So without a wall, Jerusalem was kind of a laughingstock of all the towns, and Nehemiah said, I'm not putting up with that. Okay? The temple may be here, but we got to protect it, and we got to have a population, so on and so forth. So that's what he wanted to do. Okay. So what we're beginning to read is the story of the return of the second group of exiles. Led by Ezra. Verse 3. All of you who are his people, meaning God's, may return to Jerusalem and Judah to rebuild the temple of the Lord. Okay, so Zerubbabel and his crew were already there. They had a somewhat functional system going on there. And now we're going to start building some structures, and that's why Ezra was sent back. Temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem. May your God be with you. Those who live, all right, let's stop there. He puts God's blessing upon them. Says, your God wants this temple. He has inspired me to have that happen. I am giving you what you need to go pull this off. To go do your thing. And that's what they're going to go do. Verse 4. And this verse 4 is going to be one of the most significant pieces of what Cyrus has to say. Those who live in any place where Jewish survivors are found should contribute toward their expenses by supplying them with silver and gold, supplies for the journey, and livestock, as well as a free will offering for the temple of God in Jerusalem. This sentence, okay, sending back refugees, everybody was cool with that. Rebuilding the temple, pretty much everybody was cool with that. However, there's one teensy little problem. When the people were drug off into exile, back under the Babylonians, 70 some odd years prior to that, they didn't take everybody. Okay, they took the leaders, they took the priests, scribes, I mean this with all due respect, they took the upper class. They left the shepherds, the people that work the ground, the farmers, they left all them. So imagine this. 50, 60 years passes, and suddenly people come back and say, hey, we're back! And they're all like, yo, we never left. That causes a little problem. And that problem grows into the New Testament because you know what they called the people who didn't go into exile? They had a name for them. They were called Samaritans. That's exactly right. And you don't want to mess with a Samaritan because those guys are scum, because they weren't part of what happened and blah, blah. And for any information on that, go read the New Testament. But they were the Samaritans, and they were hated. And the Samaritans, let's be honest, not terribly thrilled about everybody else coming back either. So it wasn't like one side was like, hey, guys, and the other side is like, I'd rather stab you in the eye than talk to you. No, both sides felt that way. Nobody liked anybody. And part of the reason is the proclamation from this King Cyrus guy, whoever he is, says, what am I supposed to give these people? What did he say? He said, if Jewish survivors are found, these Samaritans were found, contribute toward their expenses by supplying them with gold and silver, supplies for their journey, livestock, and a free will offering. Did you get that list? Silver and gold. Okay, so if somebody comes in and they're going to say, dude, I have this proclamation from the king. And he says, I need some silver and gold, and I need some food, and I need this. I mean, this would be no different than me going down the street here to Aaron's house and say, hey, Aaron, I have this proclamation for the president that says you owe me silver and gold and my favorite dinner and livestock and one of your kids, which that may not be as much of a sacrifice as we would have thought. But that's what he would have said, right? And Aaron's like, you can have the kid, but the rest of that I'm not sure about. But that's what it was. That's exactly what people came back in town and said. These people were like, we have always lived here. We never left. Now, we can argue as to why we never left, why you did and we didn't. Sure, we can have that conversation. But the bottom line is, possession is 9/10 of the law. And Cyrus is turning that on his head. And we're going to find out in Ezra, and we are definitely going to find out in Nehemiah, that there was a lot of people who were perturbed, to say it mildly. In fact, I've been reading, preparing for this study, I've been reading the books of Ezra and Nehemiah the whole way through for the past couple of days. Man, there's some stuff at the end of Nehemiah that we're almost going to be like, who's the good guy here? I mean, it gets that bad. So we'll get to that toward the end of the book. All right, so this is the situation that King Cyrus has set up. You got a bunch of very excited people going back to their homeland to meet a bunch of people who said, we're already home. So here we go. Okay, so this proclamation has been made. Verse 5. Then God stirred the hearts of the priests and the Levites and the leaders of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Okay, tribes of Judah and Benjamin, the reason that's significant is those, if you go back to where the tribes were originally set out in the book of Leviticus, when everything was kind of put together, the Judah and Benjamin were the tribes that were in the south. So when you talk about the sons that came back, it's the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. That's a geographic thing. They were the tribes of that area. Okay. Okay. Then God stirred the hearts of the priests and the Levites and the leaders of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of the Lord. So that's what they're going back to do. And all their neighbors assisted them by giving them vessels of silver, gold, supplies for their journey, and livestock. They gave them many choice gifts in addition to freewill offerings. Now, you may say, what about what you just said? No, these are the people they haven't left yet. These are the people in what's now Persia giving them this stuff. Okay? They're not going to get this warmer reception when they get back. Now, okay, so they've got some supplies, and they've got a head full of steam, and they're really excited, like, let's get back there and get to work. And then Cyrus says, hold on just a second. I'm going to put a little cherry on top of this for you. And here's what he does. Verse 7. King Cyrus himself brought out the valuable items was King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. He's the one that started this whole problem. He's the king that drug them all away from Babylon, 50, 60 years prior. Cyrus himself brought out the valuable items which King Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the Lord's temple in Jerusalem and placed them in the temple of his own gods. And actually, if you want to go back and read Daniel, you'll actually see the story where this happens. He actually takes the sacred articles that were in the temple, the plates and pans and basins and all the stuff that they used, and he put it in the temple of their god, which you can imagine is basically doing this to the captives, and they were perturbed about that. Okay, so Cyrus says, let's see what Cyrus does. Cyrus directed Mithridath, the treasurer of Persia, to count up these items and present them to Sheshbazzar. By the way, I'm getting none of these pronunciations right. One of the things that you accept by coming to one of my classes, A, you accept how I spell things, B, you accept how I pronounce things, and that's how it works. Sheshbazzar, the leader of the exiles returning to Judah. These were the items Cyrus donated. So there were silver trays, gold trays, silver censers, gold, so on and so forth. You see the numbers there. In all, 5,400 gold and silver items were turned over to Sheshbazzar, take back to Jerusalem when the exiles returned there from Babylon. So what the king does, again, you got to hand it to Cyrus. This guy was a crafty politician. It's no wonder he was beloved. Because, this is a big thing. These particular items are important to the people. So he's returning them, but think about what he's really giving him. The guy just said earlier in this chapter, I own every kingdom on earth. So now I'm going to hand you guys back 5,400 gold plates and bowls and stuff. I don't really care about that. But you do. So look how much goodwill I'm buying with something that I wasn't even aware I had because I had to send Sheshbazzar to go count it. I didn't even know it was there. And the guy was brilliant. And again, it's a nice gesture. And I'm not trying to downplay. It really is a nice thing for him to do, to give them these things back. Because now they get to carry these things back, and they'll be able to use them in the temple, which we'll find out later they obviously did. Again, what a great PR move, really, to do this. And it honestly costs him almost nothing because, as you can imagine, the Babylonians put these things in the temple to their god. Cyrus don't care about that god either. So not only does he not care about the god of the Israelites, he doesn't care about the god of the Babylonians either. So he's like, I don't care about none of that stuff. You guys want this stuff back? There you go. And now, we're going back to our homeland. We're going to go build the thing, and you gave us all the sacred articles back? No wonder King Cyrus is A-OK in the eyes of the Old Testament. And again, just a brilliant politician. All right, anybody have any questions? Okay, you guys are so hard to read. Your face is just like, I can't tell if you're thinking or if you're wishing this was over. I can't tell. Yeah, okay. They went back to establish a society. So they went back to occupy the town. Because, again, by their recollection, the town was empty. Now, when they got there, it wasn't. But their idea is that we need to reestablish what probably our parents remember it being when they were drug here. Yeah, building homes, setting up agriculture, animals and pasturing, all those kind of things. Set up some very rudimentary defenses. Obviously, Nehemiah is going to take care of that later. But that's what they went back to do, to establish a society. So there was a place to build a temple. Well, again, there were people there because they'd been left there. Yeah, the Babylonians didn't take everybody. And some of the people that, especially Nehemiah, who's going to have some just knockdown, drag-out fights with, are people who are like, this is our land. We never left. And as much as we root for Nehemiah, and I'm going to be honest with you, if you ask me to pick my favorite Bible character not named Jesus, I'm picking Nehemiah. I love the guy because the way he goes about things is great. My life verse. Everybody has one verse of the Bible that's their favorite that's not John 3:16. Mine is in Nehemiah, and I can't wait to show it to you because it's one of my favorites. So I have a mild bias on Nehemiah. In fact, Bev DePloy made me a robe, and she put that verse from Nehemiah on the back of it, of the stole that I wear on Sunday when she made it for me 100 years ago, whatever that was. So, all right, now, I am not going to subject you to me reading all these names. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you to look at this, and let me show you what chapter 2 proves. Okay, just kind of skim. A lot of names there. Some names you may recognize from other Bible stories. I'll go through them here in a second, point out some people and some names that we may recognize. But what you need to see here from Ezra chapter 2, as soon as they left, I mean, the dust hadn't settled from them taking the carts and stuff out of town. The very first thing they needed to do was establish who belonged. That was the number one article that they had to do. That's why these lists exist. So many people that came from this area, so many people from this family, so many groups from this town, and that was extremely important. It's going to be important in Ezra. It's going to be important in Nehemiah. Let me tell you how important it was. Chapter 2 that we have here is verbatim Nehemiah chapter 7. It is word for word the same list. That's how important it was. They wrote it down twice. And so they wanted to make sure that they had this done. Now, a couple of observations I want to make here. And again, your translation might be different than mine. But if you look chapter 2, verses 3 through 20, you'll notice it says, the family of whoever this person is. Did you guys see that? Okay. But if you look at then verses 21 through 28, it says, the people of. All right, so let me just make an observation because I wanted my seminary degree to mean something. The first group that says the family of, those are obviously people. So these are descendants of a person. And these people, if we went back and explored them and had a few more resources at our disposal, we could trace them back probably pretty far. Some of these people we're going to find out go clear back to the time of David. Some of them go back to Solomon. Some of them then go back to the days of Jeremiah, which would have been right before the exile. But these would have been important people. It would be like me standing here today and saying Abraham Lincoln. None of you met Abraham Lincoln, but when I say that name, you know exactly who I'm talking about. These names would be like that to these people. I don't know who any of them are, but they would have. Then the next group there where it says the people of, all of those are regions, are areas, including Bethlehem, which a kind of significant event took place in Bethlehem, which was, okay, remember Christmas? yeah. So some significant things happened there. But these are areas. So it would be like the people of Auglaize County or the people of Noble Township. Okay? That's how that would work. And then you've got 29 through approximately 35 there, it looks like. It says the citizens of, these are towns. These would be like the citizens of St. Mary's, the citizens of Walpock, citizens of Salina, citizens of Lima, whatever. And again, these would be towns that people would recognize. Like if I would say Columbus, you guys, Columbus, Ohio, you would know the town I'm talking about. That's here. A couple of places that I want to draw your attention to. Let me see if there's anybody here. Bethlehem I mentioned. Another one here, Jericho I saw on this list. What happened at Jericho? Anybody remember? The walls came tumbling down, exactly right. Joshua in the Battle of Jericho, and they marched around one time a day, and then on the seventh day they went 7 times, and they made this big sound, and the walls crushed. That was Jericho. So some things happened there. I'll also tell you up at verse 28, the town of Ai. I'm guessing is how you say that. That is a very significant town in the history of the world, because if you go back and read Genesis, that's where Abraham lived before he left. When God called Abraham out of a city, we talked about that last week, Ai was the town he was in. So that would have been a very ancient town. that they would all been familiar with. Okay? And you can look down there to see how some of them had more people come back. I mean, like Nebo only had 52 people, but then you got a place like Pahath Moab, had 2,800 people. So again, I don't know why the discrepancies. I'm sure there was a lot of reasons, but I don't know what they are. Questions about that? Now, if you go into verse 36, 36 to 39, these were the priests and some prophets in there who returned, their family. The one name I want to point out to you there is Pashur. We know who Pashur is. Pashur was mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, so he would have been a prophet that was working around the time of Jeremiah, which would have been around the time the Babylonians destroyed everybody. It is extremely interesting that his name lands here because Jeremiah and Pashur hated each other. So much so that Pashur had him arrested, had him beaten, put in jail. So if you go back to Jeremiah, Pashur's a bad guy, and here he's like, oh yeah, part of his family was here, and they're like, well, that's awkward, So I can't explain why his name is here. I can only, and maybe it's somebody else with the same name. I don't know, but that's the name that's there. And Jeremiah and Pashur passionately hated each other. Let's see here. The Levites, who would have been the priests, some family names there. Then verse 41, the singers of the family of Asaph. Susan said about David writing part of the Psalms. Asaph also wrote a number of the Psalms. He was the musician. And so you'll hear, if you go through the book of Psalms, you'll see a lot of Psalms of Asaph. He was the chief musician in the days of David during the heyday of Jerusalem. And so he would have been a leader in the temple. And then they even say, here's the family of the gatekeepers. The guys who guarded the door. And how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 families there. I mean, that's how important this is. We even trace the lineage of the door guarders. And the great-grandsons of the door guarders are still guarding the door. Again, that's how important what was connected was. Because what family you came from is going to matter. And actually, it's going to matter even more when we get to Nehemiah. It's going to become extremely important there. All right, and then even the temple servants. Honestly, these are the people who wash the dishes, serve supper for the priest, mop the floors. I mean, we're not talking super glamorous jobs here. Because they're servants, they're not priests, they don't serve any priestly function. They're just there to make sure the temple's presentable when people come to it. And remember, they did a bang-up job because there hasn't even been a temple for 70-some years. But they even traced those families back, and you got Grandpa's job, essentially. And a few names in there we might recognize. And then the descendants of the servants of King Solomon. So even the king had servants. Some names there. 392 it says there in verse 58. Another group from these various towns came in. All right, verse 61. So here I'm going to show you just how important who it was who you were connected to. Okay? Verse 61. 3 families of priests. Hobiah, not even close to right. Hakkoz and Barzillai. Also returned to Jerusalem. Now, who is this Barzillai guy? This Barzillai married a woman who was a descendant of Barzillai of Gilead, and he had taken her family name. Very interesting. Now we want to think, well, why did he? That's not how that works. Why did he do it? Because he wanted to belong to the people of God. Good on him. He basically married into the family, and so he came in. My guess is whoever the person he married was, my guess is she had no brothers, or they just no surviving brothers somehow. And so there was nobody to leave the inheritance to. So Barzillai said, I'll be happy to step into that. Which again, I'm not saying he was trying to pull anything. I mean, it could have been very well an honorable thing to do. Ezra's going to indicate that. But that's how he put it out. However, there was a problem with Barzillai, verse 62. But they had lost their genealogical records, so they were not allowed to serve as priests. So he married into a priestly family. He said, I want to serve as one of the sons would. And they're like, yeah, we can't prove you belong. We're not arguing your qualification. We don't doubt the desire of your heart. We're not even saying you're trying to do something wrong here. All we're saying is, if you ain't got the papers, you don't get the job. And that's how seriously they took this. And then it says, verse 63, the governor, which we're going to find out later was Nehemiah, would not even let him eat out of the priest's share of food from the sacrifices until there was a priest who could consult the Lord about the matters by the means of sacred lots. And so until we have an official capacity priest, which again, we just left. We don't have one yet. But when we get there, and to Dixie's question, when we get some of these offices functioning, and we have somebody qualified to make that determination, we'll let him cast lots, which I don't know how many of you are going to like this. It's basically rolling dice. And if it comes up good, he's in. If it don't, he's unemployed. Simple as that. So that's how they're going to do it. But they said, and they're very careful, we're going to do this right. And you have to say, we appreciate that, because remember, it was not doing it right that led to the problem in the first place. And they said, we ain't doing that again. So, Barzillai, you seem like a heck of a nice guy. We all like you. However, we are not jeopardizing our future for you. Okay, we'll have you go be a farmer or something if we have to. Okay, so with that notation, which would have been a scribe notation, which is what this would have been, 64, verse 64. A total of 42,360 people, which is a very specific number, by the way, returned to Jerusalem. This is in wave 2, as I told you. In addition to the 7,337 servants and 200 singers, both men and women. They took with them 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. Again, did they keep meticulous records? Yes. Yes, they did. They took this very seriously. And it's going to get more serious as they go along. When they arrived at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, some of the family leaders gave generously toward the rebuilding of God's temple on its original site. And each leader gave as much as he could. Did you hear that? Each leader gave as much as they could. They're setting an example. Again, we're leading by example here. Do we expect you all to pitch in? Yep. But we're going to do it first. Gave as much as he could. Their total gifts came to 61,000 gold coins, 6,250 pounds of silver, and 100 robes to the priest. So the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, the temple servants, and some of the common people settled in the villages near Jerusalem. The rest of the people returned to other towns of Judah from which they had come. So basically, okay, so we have established these are the guys who are going to take care of the temple, or what's left of it. They're going to go there. They're going to try to establish the structure. They're going to establish all these different things. They're going to do this work. Now everybody else, go home and work. Go to work. Go build your farms. Go breed your livestock. Go and learn agriculture. Go and develop relationships and grow. Come together as communities, because that's what we're going to do. Okay? Questions about that? Following this okay? I mean, it's not rocket science here. All right, that is the story of the return of Wave 2. Let's go take a look at the story of Wave 3. Let's turn over a couple pages to Nehemiah chapter 1. Now, it's kind of funny and to draw a parallel to Nehemiah. What I want you to remember as we're reading this is remember how meticulous Ezra was. Exact number of horses, exact number of coins, exact number of people. I mean, everything was exact. And this Barzillai guy, we weren't sure about him, so we kept him out, but we didn't, stone him to death. But we kept him out till somebody was qualified to make a determination on his behalf. I mean, very meticulous. So when it comes to the temple, very meticulous. Nehemiah chapter 1. These are the memoirs of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. All right, in the late autumn of the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign. Artaxerxes was the guy who followed Cyrus. I was at the fortress of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. So people had been, I don't know if they had gone with Ezra or they'd gone after Ezra, I'm not sure. But they've been to see how things are going. So now what's supposed to be happening, to Dixie's question, society was supposed to be reestablished. Wave 1. Wave 2, let's get the temple running. So this report comes back. So verse 2. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who had survived the captivity and about things going on in Jerusalem. They said to me, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They're in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down and the gates have been burned. So what he asked is how are things going? And Hanani told him the truth. It ain't going well. Okay? Things in the temple apparently are happening, but that's it. Their mission was to go back and build the temple, and that's all they're doing. So the rest of the town is falling apart. Now, you think about it. With the town of Jerusalem not being up to snuff, they could build this temple. And remember, that I kind of made fun of the sacred articles. But remember, what was everybody giving them along the way, or supposed to give them by order of the king? Gold. And gold. And more gold. And all this was in the temple. And everybody knew it. And there's no way to defend that. It's kind of like leaving the door of the church standing wide open, which happens occasionally. You're not necessarily responsible, but you're definitely inviting trouble. And that's what Hanani is observing. And he reports that to his brother Nehemiah. Verse 4, when I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. Okay? I think that anytime you're emotionally upset about something, pretty good advice. Fast and pray. I think I'd go with that. Then I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of unfailing love with those who love him and obey his commandments, listen to my prayer. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people Israel. I confess we have sinned against you. Again, he's not saying what's going on there is bad. He's recognizing that we as people have not held up our end of the bargain, hence the exile in the first place. So he's recognizing some things are not what they should be. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. Verse 7. We have sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, laws, and regulations that you gave us through Moses. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. If you sin, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, even if you are exiles to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place I have chosen for my name to be honored. Okay? So this is his prayer. He said, again, Nehemiah shows extreme knowledge of the scriptures. He may be a political person. He may be a governor. But he knows his stuff. He's been to Sunday school. Okay? Verse 10. We are your servants and the people you rescue by your great power and might. O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success now as I go ask the king for a great favor. Put it into his heart to be kind to me. In those days, I was the king's cupbearer. Now, a couple things about that. Nehemiah's job, because he was exiled, so his slave job, for lack of a better term, is he attended the king, which you have to admit is probably a pretty cushy gig. He's not digging holes. He's not, carrying stones and stuff. His job is essentially the king's personal bartender. That's what he does. Now, one of the things that I want you to see here is that's the guy who ends up being the governor. So we went through all these meticulous things to make sure we got the priestly class right, but the guy who's going to come back and be the governor is the guy who mixed the wine for the king. Okay, not so worried about qualifications anymore. All right, we just want somebody who'll do the job, and that's what he does. All right, we're going to go on here a little bit. Chapter 2. Early the following spring, during the 12th month of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never appeared sad in his presence before this. And the king asked me, "Why are you sad? You aren't sick, are you? You look like a man with deep troubles." One of the roles of the person who did the job he was doing is whenever he would serve the king, he had to do one thing first. Anybody know what it is? He had to drink it first. So if the king comes in and the guy tastes his wine, looks sick, I want to know why he looks sick. Because if he drops dead, I ain't drinking what he's serving. Okay? Because remember, these guys knew nothing of bacteria, nothing of Tupperware, nothing of refrigeration. They didn't know anything about any of that. So what they would do is they would, his job not only was to know what the king liked to drink, but also to make sure it was safe because in those days, that's why wine was so important. The alcohol in the wine killed the bacteria, but the water kind of cut the wine, so it wasn't like, drinking kerosene or something like that. And that's the way it worked. By mixing those two things together, they canceled each other out. But as you can imagine, that's a very, very imperfect science. So a little bit too much bacteria, or a little bit too much alcohol, and suddenly you have potential problems there in what the king's going to drink. So if the guy takes a drink and he drops dead, the king's like, we want a new guy here, all right? Or we want to boil the water or something. Because they didn't understand that, and that's how it worked. So that's why the king noticed them. He's like, if you're sick, I want to know why. All right, verse 2. Then I was badly frightened, but I replied, long live the king. Why shouldn't I be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been broken down. And the king asked, well, how can I help? With the prayer of the God of heaven, I replied, if it please your majesty, and if you're pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. So essentially what Nehemiah is going to set off here is wave 3 of the return of the exiles. So there was Zerubbabel and the group he took back. Now there's Ezra and the group he took back. And now there's going to be Nehemiah and the group he takes back. So that's what he says. Now, if the request stopped there, I think we all could agree. All right, yeah, I think I can send you back. Okay, so verse 6. The king with the queen sitting beside him asked, how long will you be gone? When will you return? So meaning, I'm not releasing you forever. I mean, I'm going to give you a leave of absence, essentially. So, and actually, keep that in mind because that's going to come into play later in the book. So the king agreed, and I set a date for my departure. Okay? So there, looks good. Nehemiah's going to get to go home. However, verse 7, I also said to the king, one thing Nehemiah was not afraid to do was push his luck. If it please the king, your majesty, give me letters to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through the territories on my way to Judah. Okay. So give me a letter that says, don't mess with me, or else the king will have you killed. I mean, again, keep me safe. All right. Verse 8. Then please send a letter to Asaph. This is a different Asaph than the singer Asaph. Send a letter to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. If you're going to ask for it all. I want to build myself a nice house, and I want to build this wall, and I'm going to need some lumber. And the king's like, dude, I just gave you time off. I thought that's all you wanted. And he's like, no, I'm going to need some more stuff too. So build from out, and the king granted those requests. No context. King said yes. Good for him. Because the gracious hand of God was on me. Verse 9. Then I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, and I delivered the king's letters to them, and they all probably went, I'm sorry, what? We're supposed to give you how many trees? The king, I should add, had also sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. We're going to find out why that is in a second. But so the king also sent him a personal group to protect him. However, verse 10. Some names you're definitely going to want to hang on to as we read Nehemiah. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of my arrival, they were very angry that someone had come who was interested in helping Israel. Who are Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite? They are Samaritans. They are the people who don't want these people coming back. And now Nehemiah is going to bring in a whole bunch of people and see, all right, the first wave come in, reestablish Jerusalem. All right. Second wave come in, rebuild the temple. All right. But now we're talking about building walls. And now we're talking about creating a city. Now we're talking about making things the way they used to be with you on the inside of the wall and clearly us on the outside of the wall. That's going to be a big problem, as we will see multiple times throughout this book. And we're going to talk about some of the strategies that Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, and there's one more guy they hook up with later. And the way they go about making problems is going to sound very familiar. Because we think today we have discovered everything for the first time. The kind of strategies they use against them are going to sound very familiar to things we see today, and we'll get to that later. All right, we're going to knock off there at verse 11. We'll pick up verse 11 and kind of go on from there next week. So, and we'll see how far we make it. Any questions you guys got before we head upstairs? Yes?
I might have missed this somewhere or something,
Yep.
but why was it so important to put in there the queen was sitting beside him?
Because it was an official capacity. With the king and the queen both sitting there, he was in the throne room, and it was an official thing in there. I guess we also could read into that to say maybe the queen liked him better than the king did too.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, it could very well have been that too. Yeah. He might have specifically waited for the queen to be there because he was buddies with the queen. That very well could have been. So, good deal. All right, you guys' faces are I'm having a rough time here. So, are you guys enjoying this? You guys good? Is this good? Everybody going to come back next week? I guess we'll let you vote with your feet. So, good. So we'll start with verse 11, and we'll go back and do some Ezra as well, because I want to kind of do these together, and we'll see how far we get. So, very good. So definitely, if you want to read ahead, you don't have to, but if you want to, definitely read the rest of chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Nehemiah, and probably we'll may get into chapter 4, or we may go back to Ezra. I'm not sure which way we'll go on that. So, very good. All right, I don't hear chaos coming from upstairs this week. That could be a plus. All right, guys, you want to pack? You can leave your stuff here if you want. We're going to walk upstairs and take some time to get to know the kids up there. I don't know how many Don's got up there. We may go back to Ezra a little bit too. Probably like chapter 3, maybe.